She only mentioned a date. That's all it took. One sentence, casual, thrown into the silence of a marble kitchen like a stone dropped into still water. And Jamin Seo, a man who had ordered silence with a glance, who had made powerful men flinch with nothing more than stillness, stopped moving entirely. No anger, no words. Just a quiet so heavy it pressed against Harper's chest like a hand. She didn't understand it then. She would. If you're watching this story, hit like. Drop the name of your city in the comments so I can see how far this has traveled. And follow so you don't miss what comes next. The estate had a particular kind of silence, not the silence of emptiness. Harper had learned that distinction 8 months ago on her first morning inside the iron gates of the CO property on Chicago's North Shore. Empty places felt hollow, like sound had simply left. This silence was different. It was occupied, waited, the kind of silence that had a presence, that moved through corridors and settled into rooms and reminded you, constantly, that you were inside someone else's world and not your own. Harper Williams had made her peace with that a long time ago. She was 29 years old, 5'6", with hands that had stopped being soft sometime around her 22nd birthday, when the money ran out and the jobs that paid actual wages required actual labor. She wasn't fragile. She didn't present herself that way. She kept her dark hair pulled back during working hours, wore clothes that were clean and unremarkable, and had developed over the course of 8 months a precise internal geography of the estate. Which rooms Jamin used in the mornings, which corridors he favored in the evenings, where he stood when he was on the phone and didn't want to be heard, where he went when something had gone wrong in whatever world he operated in that she was never permitted to see. She knew his patterns better than she knew her own. That was the job. That was what the position required. Live-in, full estate management, 6 figures, which sounded extraordinary until you understood what it actually meant. That your hours were not hours, they were availability. That your time off existed on paper and rarely in practice. That the man who signed your checks was also the man whose coffee you made at 5:45 in the morning, and whose study you tidied at 11 at night, and whose silence you learned to read the way other people read weather. She told herself it was professional. She told herself a lot of things. The kitchen was the largest room in the main residence. Pale marble countertops, professional-grade appliances, a center island the size of a small car. It caught the morning light well. Harper liked mornings in the kitchen. It was one of the few hours when the house felt like it belonged to nobody in particular, when the silence was just silence and not something that watched you. She was rinsing the French press at the deep basin sink, her back to the doorway, when she heard him. Jamin moved quietly. That was one of the first things she had noticed about him. Not quietly the way careful people moved, placing each foot with deliberate thought. Quietly the way certain animals moved, without decision, without effort, as though silence were simply the natural result of his presence, rather than something he cultivated. She had stopped being startled by him appearing at the edge of rooms months ago. Now she just registered it, the way you registered a change in temperature. "You're up early," she said, not turning from the sink. "I didn't sleep." She didn't ask why. That was another rule she had built for herself. Unwritten, unspoken, but absolute. She didn't ask about his nights. She didn't ask about the calls that came in after midnight. She didn't ask about the men who arrived through the rear entrance in dark vehicles and left an hour later without being offered so much as water. She cleaned the rooms those conversations happened in. She kept the surfaces clean. She kept her eyes forward and her questions to herself. He crossed to the coffee station without speaking. She heard him open the cabinet, retrieve the ground coffee, run the water. He made his own coffee in the mornings. That was another thing she had learned. There were specific tasks he didn't relinquish, not out of distrust, but out of something else. Habit, maybe. Or the need to maintain some small, ordinary ritual that belonged entirely to him. Harper dried her hands on the linen towel folded over the oven handle. Outside the window above the sink, the lake was flat and gray, the November sky sitting low over the water like a lid pressed down over something trying to escape. She turned to collect the grounds from the compost bin and found him already watching her. Not staring. Jamin Seo did not stare. Staring implied effort, implied wanting. This was different. The way his eyes tracked her movement with a stillness that suggested she had been in his peripheral awareness for some time, and he had simply allowed his attention to settle without redirecting it. I was 36. Korean American, second generation, raised between Chicago and Seoul in a household that Harper understood from context and careful listening, had been neither simple nor safe. He was not a large man in the way that drew immediate attention, not broad-shouldered or physically imposing in any theatrical sense. What he was composed. Entirely. Completely. In a way that Harper had come to understand was not natural ease, but something forged, something maintained at a cost she couldn't calculate. He dressed well without advertising it. Dark trousers, a charcoal shirt rolled at the sleeves. His watch was expensive and understated. His hands, she had noticed without meaning to, were steady in a way that most people's weren't. "I'm going out this evening," Harper said. She had not planned to say it. It emerged simply because it was true, and because it occurred to her, in that particular moment, that she had been carrying it around for 2 days like something that required permission to put down. Jamin said nothing immediately. He poured the water over the grounds, set the kettle down, watched the bloom. "Out," he said. "Not a question. Not exactly. Dinner. A friend introduced me to someone. We've been texting for a few weeks." She kept her voice even, matter of fact. "I'll be back by 10, 11 at the latest." The kitchen held its silence. Jamin's hand rested on the counter beside the coffee press. His fingers didn't move. The muscle along his jaw did something subtle. Not a clench, not a reaction anyone else would have caught. Just a slight, almost imperceptible shift in the architecture of his stillness. "A date," he said. "Yes." He looked into the coffee press. "What time does it begin?" Harper blinked. 7? He nodded once. Pressed the plunger slowly, evenly, the way he did everything. Poured his coffee. Lifted the mug. "I'll need the Harrington file moved to the front study before you leave," he said. "Of course." He walked out of the kitchen. Harper stood at the sink and did not move for a moment. The flat gray lake sat outside the window, unchanged. The house resumed its particular silence. She told herself the strange pressure in her sternum was nothing. She had become very good at telling herself things. His name was Ethan Brooks. 31. Elementary school teacher, 4th grade. He had an honest face, the kind that looked like it had never been required to hide anything serious, and he laughed at his own jokes with a self-awareness that saved it from being irritating. He had been introduced to Harper by her friend Danny, who had presented him with the enthusiasm of someone who had decided Harper's life required intervention. "He's normal," Danny had said on the phone 3 weeks earlier. "I know that sounds like the lowest possible bar, but I genuinely mean it as a compliment. He's just a good, normal, uncomplicated man." Harper had thought about that word. Uncomplicated. She had agreed to the date. The restaurant was in River North, a mid-range Italian place with warm lighting and a noise level that forced you to lean slightly toward the person across the table, which Harper suspected was by design. Ethan was already there when she arrived, standing near the host stand in a navy blazer that he'd clearly pressed for the occasion, and when he saw her he smiled with a kind of unguarded relief that she found unexpectedly touching. "I was worried I had the wrong place," he said. "You had the right place," she said. They were seated at a corner table. The wine arrived quickly. Ethan talked about his students with the particular combination of exhaustion and genuine affection that Harper associated with people who had chosen their work honestly and not for any exterior reason. He asked her questions and actually listened to the answers, which she had learned was rarer than it should have been. It should have been a good evening. It was a perfectly good evening. And yet. Her phone buzzed at 7:43. She glanced at it beneath the table. A message from Jamin. The Harrington file. Did you move it to the front study or the side office? She had moved it to the front study. She had told him she would move it to the front study. She had in fact moved it to the front study before leaving and confirmed it with a note on his desk, which she had never done before and had done that evening for no reason she could clearly articulate. She typed back, "Front study," on the left side of the desk. "Everything okay?" Ethan asked. "Work," she said. "Sorry." He waved it off, easy and unbothered, and refilled her wine glass. 7:59. Another buzz. The Nakamura account folder. Blue cover. I can't locate it. Harper set her fork down slowly. She knew exactly where the Nakamura folder was. She had organized it herself 2 weeks ago and placed it in the second drawer of the filing cabinet in the East Corridor office, which Jae-min himself had been present for. She typed, "Second drawer, East Corridor office," filed under N. Ethan was telling her about a field trip he was planning to the Natural History Museum. She returned her attention to him. She asked a question, She was present. She was entirely capable of being present. 822. What is the name of the property management service we used for the Gold Coast renovation? Harper stared at the screen. The property management service. For the Gold Coast renovation, which had concluded 14 months ago, which Jae-min had personally overseen and for which she had not been employed at this company, and therefore had no institutional memory of whatsoever. She typed, I don't have records from before my start date. You'll need to check the archived files in the main office. She put her phone face down on the table. Sorry, she said again. Demanding job, Ethan said, with sympathy rather than judgment. Something like that. She left her phone face down for the next 20 minutes. When she turned it over again, there was one more message. Not a question about a file, not a request, a screenshot. The screenshot was a Google Maps image. A pin dropped on a specific block in River North. The pin was on the exact block where the restaurant sat. Harper looked at it for a long moment. Her thumb hovered over the screen. Then she set the phone down again, picked up her wine glass, and finished what was in it in 2 steady swallows. Ethan said something about dessert. I'm fine, she said. Thank you. I'm fine. She was home by 10:15. The main residence was lit from within, the study windows glowing amber, the kitchen light left on the way it always was. Harper came through the side entrance, hung her coat in the mudroom, and stood for a moment in the quiet corridor. She could hear nothing. The house absorbed sound the way it absorbed everything else, completely, without remainder. She walked to the study. The door was open. Jae-min was at his desk, a lamp casting a narrow circle of light over the papers in front of him. He didn't look up when she appeared in the doorway. He had the particular quality, in these moments, of a man who had known she was coming before she arrived and had already decided how to receive her. You're back, he said. I said I'd be back by 11. It's 10:15. Yes. He set his pen down. Looked up. His face in the lamplight was composed and unreadable in the way she had learned meant he was reading her carefully and had no intention of revealing what he found. How was your evening? He said. Harper stepped fully into the doorway. She crossed her arms, not defensively. She had stopped being defensive around him months ago, had decided it cost too much energy. But in the particular way she stood when she was organizing her thoughts before she said something she meant to say. You sent me a screenshot of the restaurant, she said. I was checking a location for a client dinner. The pin was on my block. River North has several quality establishments. Jae-min. He said nothing. His eyes were steady, dark, not shifting from hers. The Nakamura folder, she said. The Gold Coast renovation. The Harrington file you already knew the location of. She kept her voice level. Not angry. She wasn't angry. She wasn't sure what she was, which was its own problem. You knew where everything was. I was verifying. You were texting me through dinner. You responded. That landed differently than she expected. Because it was true. She had responded every time. She had not silenced her phone. She had not put it in her bag and left it there. She had checked it. She had checked it, and she had answered, and she had, if she was being precise about it, felt something she was not prepared to name each time the screen lit up with his name. That's not the point, she said. What is the point? The lamp made shadows in the planes of his face. Outside the study windows, the lake was invisible in the darkness, but she could feel it out there, that flat November weight of cold water under cold sky. I don't know yet, she said honestly. Jae-min held her gaze for a moment longer. Then he looked back at his papers. The Harrington file was exactly where you said it was, he said quietly. Thank you. Harper stood in the doorway for another second. Then she turned and walked down the corridor toward her room. She did not sleep well. The days that followed were unremarkable in every exterior way. The estate ran as it always ran. Harper managed the household staff, 2 cleaners who came 3 days a week, a groundskeeper who was largely self-directed, a rotating cast of tradespeople for maintenance and repair. She coordinated Jae-min's domestic calendar, managed his residence-related correspondence, oversaw the provisioning and restocking that kept the property functioning at the standard it was expected to function at. She was good at the work. Genuinely good, not just technically competent. She had a spatial intelligence that bordered on instinctive. She could walk into a room once and reconstruct its geography from memory, could anticipate needs before they were expressed, could identify the invisible friction points in a household's daily operation and resolve them before they became problems. Jamin noticed this. He had noticed it early and had, in his way, indicated his recognition, not with compliments, which were not his mode, but with the particular kind of specific professional trust that was harder to earn and meant more when given. He had stopped questioning her decisions about the house within her first 3 months. He had given her a household budget and a signature authority on vendor contracts without being asked. He had, on 2 occasions that she knew of, deflected questions from his associates about why he maintained a live-in housekeeper rather than a property management service, and had done so in terms that made clear the conversation was not one he was interested in continuing. She had not asked him about those conversations. She had filed the information away in the same internal cabinet where she kept everything about him that she had learned without permission, the small accumulated evidence of a man who was not what he presented himself to be, or rather who was exactly what he presented himself to be, and also something more, something that she could feel the edges of without being able to look at directly. After the date, something shifted, not dramatically, not in any way that would have been visible to the cleaners or the groundskeeper or to anyone who did not spend as much time in proximity to Jamin Co as Harper did. But it was there, a difference in the way space operated between them. Like a measurement had changed, the precise, habitual distance they kept had contracted by some small degree that neither of them had officially acknowledged, but both of them knew. He looked at her differently. Or rather, he had always looked at her in a way she hadn't allowed herself to examine, and now she examined it. His eyes didn't linger in any way that was disrespectful or inappropriate. It was subtler than that. It was the quality of attention, the way a man's eyes moved toward a point in a room before he was consciously aware of doing it. The way her position in a space seemed to register to him automatically. The way he angled his body slightly in her direction in rooms they occupied together without turning to face her. She caught it. And then she caught herself catching it, which was worse. She told herself she was imagining it. She had always been prone to reading too much into stillness. A childhood habit she'd never fully shaken, the instinct of someone who had grown up in a household where silence always meant something, and you learned early to decode it or pay the price. She texted Ethan on Thursday. They had not spoken since the date. She kept the message brief and honest. She had enjoyed meeting him but didn't think there was a connection worth pursuing. She wished him well. She meant it. He replied with grace and without drama, which confirmed that Danny had been right about him being a genuinely good person, which made Harper feel worse about the whole thing in a way she couldn't entirely justify. She did not tell herself it had nothing to do with Jae-min. She had learned over 8 months of living inside a world built on careful fictions that she had very little tolerance left for lying to herself. The Friday after she ended things with Ethan, Jae-min came to find her. She was in the East Wing library, a room she used in the late afternoons when the house was quiet and her administrative tasks were finished. She wasn't reading. She was sitting in the leather chair by the window with a cup of tea going cold on the side table, watching the wind move through the bare oak trees that lined the north boundary of the property. She heard his footsteps in the corridor, recognized them without looking up. He appeared in the doorway, leaned against the frame, did not come in. "You ended it," he said. Harper looked at him. "I ended what?" "The date. The teacher." A beat. Ethan. The use of his name was deliberate, and they both knew it. Harper kept her face level. "How do you know that?" "I noticed you haven't been on your phone in the evenings." She held his gaze. "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. The library was quiet. The wind pressed against the windows, found no entry, withdrew. Jaemin's posture against the doorframe was relaxed in the way his posture was always relaxed. Not casual, but controlled. Ease that was a decision rather than a state. "Why?" he said. "Why did I end it?" "Yes." Harper picked up her tea. It was cold. She set it back down. "It wasn't right," she said. "What wasn't right about it?" She looked at him for a long moment. At the lamplight from the corridor behind him. At the particular stillness of his face in the gray afternoon light coming through the library windows. "I'm not going to answer that," she said. Something moved behind his eyes. "Not much. Enough." "All right," he said. He stayed in the doorway for another moment. Then he pushed off the frame, straightened, and walked back down the corridor. His footsteps faded. The house returned to its particular silence. Harper sat with her cold tea and the wind in the oak trees and the weight of everything she wasn't saying. pressing against the inside of her chest like something that needed more space than she had given it. She sat there for a long time. What? 2 weeks passed. Then 10 days. Then a Sunday evening in early November when the first real cold front moved in off the lake, and the temperature dropped 15 degrees in 4 hours, and the estate settled into the kind of deep, insulated quiet that came with the first serious approach of winter. Harper was in the kitchen at 9:30 when Jamin came downstairs. He was still dressed. He often worked late on Sundays, calls with associates in different time zones, the administrative architecture of a life she was not permitted to see clearly. He looked tired in a way he rarely permitted himself to look. There were shadows under his eyes, and the composure that was usually effortless seemed, that evening, to require something from him. He sat down at the kitchen island without being invited and without explanation. Harper didn't ask. She filled the kettle, set it on the burner. "I have a dinner," he said. "Week after next. The Alderman property downtown. One of my legitimate holdings." The clarification was unusual. He didn't typically qualify his business to her. 12 guests. I'll need it managed." "I can do that," Harper said. "The regular catering coordinator is unavailable." "I said I can do it." He looked at her. In the kitchen light, the tiredness in his face was more visible. The shadows, the weight of something he was carrying that she couldn't see and was not going to ask about. "It's a significant event," he said. "The guests are—" He stopped. "Influential." "I know what your guests are like," she said. A pause. "Yes," he said. "You do." The kettle began to build toward boiling. Harper got 2 mugs down without asking whether he wanted tea. She had stopped asking 8 months ago. She knew. "Harper," he said. She turned from the cabinet. He was looking at the surface of the island, not at her. His hands were flat on the marble, fingers spread, in the way she had noticed he held surfaces when he was organizing his thoughts, like he was steadying something. "I'm aware," he said slowly, "that the last several weeks have been—" He stopped again, seemed to reject whatever word he'd been reaching for. "Unusual." "A little," she said. "I'm not." He paused. "Apologizing." "I didn't ask you to." He looked up then. His eyes met hers across the kitchen island. The kettle reached boiling and clicked off, and neither of them moved toward it. "No," he said, "you didn't." Harper held his gaze. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the wind was picking up off the lake. She could hear it beginning to move against the north-facing windows. A low sound like breath held too long before release. "The dinner," she said finally. "Week after next." "Yes." "I'll need the guest list by Friday. Dietary restrictions, seating preferences, any known conflicts between attendees. I'll have it to you by Thursday. Catering vendors. Do you have a preference, or do you want me to source?" "Source. You know what I like." She did. That was the problem, and the thing that was not a problem, and the entire complicated architecture of the last 8 months compressed into a single sentence spoken in a cold kitchen at 9:30 on a Sunday night with the winter coming in off the lake. "All right," she said. She turned back to the kettle, poured the water, brought his mug around to his side of the island, and set it in front of him without ceremony. He wrapped his hands around it, looked down at it. "Thank you," he said. Not for the tea, she understood. Not entirely. Harper picked up her own mug and stood on the opposite side of the island, and they drank their tea in the kind of silence that had stopped being silent some time ago without either of them marking the exact moment it changed. Outside, the first winter wind found the gaps in the old estate walls and made itself heard. Inside, something was building toward a point of no return neither of them was ready to name. But both of them could feel it coming, like weather, like inevitability, like a line drawn in frost that they were both already leaning across without having taken the step. The dinner was in 11 days. Harper told herself that was what occupied her thoughts during the first week of November. The logistics, the sourcing, the particular calibration required when managing an event for men whose expectations were shaped by a world she was adjacent to, but not inside. She told herself that was why she woke at 6 instead of 7, why she sat at the kitchen table with her coffee and her laptop and her vendor lists before the house had fully come alive around her. She was good at telling herself things. The guest list arrived Thursday morning, as promised. 12 names. She recognized 3 of them from previous events she'd managed at the estate, men with the particular quality of stillness that she associated with Jai Min's world. Men whose courtesy was precise and deliberate, and whose eyes did something calculating beneath it. The other 9 were new to her. She researched them the way she researched everything, methodically, without drama, building a picture from publicly available information and the careful inferences she'd learned to draw from what wasn't said. She built the seating chart on a spreadsheet, cross-referenced dietary restrictions, called 4 catering vendors, and selected the one that had the best response time and the clearest understanding of what she meant when she said the presentation needed to be understated. She sourced the floral arrangements, nothing ostentatious, nothing that required explanation. She confirmed the details of the Alderman property with the building manager and walked through the space on a Tuesday afternoon while Jaemin was in meetings downtown. The property was beautiful in the way that Jaemin's spaces were always beautiful, cold and precise, and arranged with the kind of intentional restraint that cost more than extravagance. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago River. Dark wood. Excellent light. She stood at the window for a moment and watched the river moving below, gray-green and deliberate, carrying whatever it carried toward wherever it was going. Then she went back to work. He found her in the study on Thursday evening. She was at the secondary desk, the one she used when she needed to spread physical documents, which she preferred for certain kinds of planning, with the seating chart printed and annotated and the catering confirmation spread beside it. She heard him come in, but didn't look up. She was in the middle of a note. "The Marchetti table placement," she said without turning. "I put him at the far end from Cho. I'm assuming that's correct." A pause. "How did you know there was a conflict?" Cho's assistant called to confirm the invitation and mentioned they'd had a scheduling overlap in September that required resolution. She looked up then. "I inferred." Jaemin stood in his doorway with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up, and the particular look he got when something had surprised him and he was deciding whether to show it. He decided not to. He crossed to the desk and looked at the seating chart. "Marchetti at the far end is correct," he said. "I know." He looked at her. She looked back at her notes. He pulled the chair from the corner and sat down across the desk from her without being invited, which he had never done before. Harper registered this without reacting to it, and made herself keep her eyes on the document in front of her for a full 4 seconds before she allowed herself to look at him. "I was looking at the seating chart." His expression was neutral in the way that neutral was a thing he constructed, not a thing that occurred naturally to him. She had learned to see the construction, the slight deliberateness of it, the way a man who felt things carefully chose to arrange his face above them. "There's something else," he said. "Okay, one of the guests. Harlan Voss." He said the name the way he said names he disliked, with the particular flatness of someone who had decided a name didn't deserve inflection. "He is not someone I'd have invited under different circumstances. He's attending at the request of one of my business partners. A courtesy." Harper waited. "He has a habit," Jaemin said, "of mistaking access for permission." She looked up from her notes, met his eyes. "I'm telling you," he'd said, "because you'll be managing the event. Not because I expect a problem, because I want you to know." "I appreciate that," she said. "If there is a problem, there won't be." Harper. "I've managed rooms full of men like that before," she said. "I know how to move." Something shifted in his expression. Not much. A tightening around the eyes, something that was not anger and not concern exactly, but sat between them, pressing in a direction she couldn't quite identify. "I know you do," he said. "That isn't the point." "Then what's the point?" He held her gaze for a moment, then looked back at the seating chart. "Put Voss nearest the kitchen corridor," he said, "closest to where you'll be managing service." Harper looked at the chart, considered it, wrote the change in. "Done," she said. He stood, picked up his jacket from the back of the chair, paused at the door. "The menu," he said. "Whatever you've chosen. It will be right." He left. Harper sat with her pen hovering over the seating chart and the particular pressure in her chest that she had been living with for 2 weeks and could no longer pretend was professional tension. She made herself finish the note. The dinner was on a Wednesday. Harper arrived at the Alderman property at 3 in the afternoon with 4 hours before the first guest was expected. The catering team came at 3:30. She walked them through the space, confirmed the setup, adjusted 2 table placements she'd reconsidered since Tuesday, and managed a brief crisis involving a missing case of the wine she'd specified by locating the backup vendor she'd identified when she was sourcing and had the replacement delivered by 5. She was wearing what she always wore for events she managed: black, structured, unremarkable. Clothes that said she was there in a professional capacity and were not an invitation to any other interpretation. She'd learned that lesson years before Jaimin's employ in other rooms for other people, and she wore it now like a second skin. The guests began arriving at 7. She watched from the edge of the room the way she always watched, tracking movement, reading the temperature of the space, noting which conversations were comfortable and which had the particular stiffness that required management. The catering team moved well. The room looked exactly as she'd intended it to look. The bar service was efficient and unobtrusive. Jamin moved through the room with the ease that she had watched him deploy in social situations. A controlled ease, not warmth exactly, but a quality of attention that made the person he was speaking to feel that they had his complete focus. It was a skill. She recognized it as a skill and recognized also that beneath the skill was something more, that the attention was real even if the warmth was curated. He caught her eye twice in the first hour. The first time he was mid-conversation with a man she identified as Cho from the guest list. He looked at her for 2 seconds, long enough to confirm she was all right, she understood, long enough to register her presence in the room, and then returned his attention to Cho. The second time she was near the service corridor directing the next course, and he was crossing the room toward the bar, and their eyes met for a moment that lasted longer than 2 seconds, and carried something she had no clean word for. She looked away first. She needed to look away first. That was clear. She went back to managing the room. Harlan Voss was in his mid-50s. He had the look of a man who had been attractive in his 30s and had spent the subsequent decades using money to approximate what age had taken. He was loud in the way certain men were loud, not in volume, but in presence, in the particular way he occupied space and assumed that his occupation of it was welcome. Harper became aware of him watching her at 8:15. She had managed that kind of watching before. It was a specific, recognizable quality of attention, the surveillance of a man who had decided something without asking and was now simply confirming the timeline. She kept her movements professional and her face neutral and did not make eye contact and positioned herself, when possible, with something solid behind her. At 8:45, the first course was being cleared. Harper was near the head of the table, confirming the second course timing with the catering lead when Voss appeared beside her. "Exceptional evening," he said. His voice was the same as his presence, taking up space it hadn't been offered. "Thank you," she said, not turning fully toward him, eyes on the catering lead. "Excuse me a moment. You manage all of Jaimin's events?" "I'm the estate manager, yes." She finished the exchange with the catering lead and turned because there was no professional way not to. She kept her expression pleasant and level. "Can I help you with something?" "Just admiring the organization?" He smiled. "And the organizer?" "Thank you," she said again, the word adore being closed rather than opened. "Enjoy the evening." She moved to step past him. His hand caught her arm. Not hard. Not aggressively. Just his hand on her forearm, just below the elbow. A presumption dressed as a gesture. Harper stopped. She looked at his hand on her arm. She felt the stillness that came over her in those moments. The particular practiced calm that sat over the actual reaction like a lid over something very hot. She was about to remove his hand herself, efficiently and without seeing, which she was entirely prepared and capable of doing. She didn't get the chance. Jamin was there. She hadn't seen him move. He was simply present, beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, positioned with the particular geometry of someone who had placed himself between a thing and a threat without drawing attention to the fact that that was what he was doing. He didn't touch Voss. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't do anything that the other 10 people in the room could have looked at and described later as a confrontation. He simply looked at him. It was the kind of look that Harper had seen him deploy exactly once before, in the 8 months she'd been at the estate, directed at a contractor who'd made the mistake of dismissing her assessment of a structural issue in front of Jaimin. The look lasted 3 seconds. It said nothing out loud. It communicated everything. Voss's hand left her arm. "Jamin," Voss said, recalibrating, rearranging himself into something social. "Exceptional evening. Your people have—" "Thank you for coming," Jamin said. The courtesy was absolute and offered no warmth whatsoever. "I believe the second course is being served." Voss took the exit, moved back toward his seat. Jamin did not look at Harper immediately. He looked at the room, checked it the way she'd watched him check rooms, A brief, efficient read of the temperature and the positions and whether anything else required his attention. Then he looked at her. "Are you all right?" he said, quietly. Not a performance. "Yes," she said. "Harper." "I was handling it," she said. "I know." They looked at each other. The room moved around them. Conversation, the clink of glassware, the soft percussion of a catered dinner operating at the standard it had been organized to operate at. "The second course," she said. "Yes," he said. She walked toward the kitchen corridor. She did not look back. Her heart was doing something irregular that she managed by counting her steps to the kitchen door. The car was black and quiet, and smelled faintly of leather and cold air. The city moved past the windows in amber and white, the particular light of Chicago in November, the bridges over the river lit from below, the skyline pressing up against a low, dark sky. Harper had not planned to accept the ride. The evening had wound down by 10:30. The guests had dispersed in their careful, deliberate way, the particular exit choreography of men who did not leave rooms without having accomplished what they'd come to accomplish. The catering team had broken down efficiently and been gone by 11. The building manager had locked up. Harper had been on the sidewalk outside the Alderman property, calling for a car, when Jamin's driver had appeared beside her and told her the car was waiting. She had stood on the sidewalk in the November cold for a moment, her phone in her hand, and made a decision she was aware she was making. She got in. Jamin was already inside. He was looking out the window when she got in, and he didn't turn immediately, which she recognized as something he did when he was deciding how to enter a conversation. The brief delay, the look away, the gathering. The car moved into traffic. "Voss will not be at any future event," he said. "You don't need to—" "I'm not asking your permission," he said. "I'm telling you." Harper looked at him. I was still looking out the window. The city light moved across his face in intervals. Amber, dark, amber, dark. "I was handling it," she said again. "You were." He turned then, finally, and looked at her directly. "I know exactly what you're capable of handling. That isn't why I stepped in." "Then why?" The car stopped at a light. The river was visible through the windshield. The dark water, the lit bridges, the city going about its enormous indifferent business. "You know why," he said. Harper's hands were in her lap. She was aware of them, aware of the stillness she was maintaining against the thing that wanted to move, to close distance, to do something irreversible. She was aware that they were in the back of a car in the middle of the city, and that the driver was 6 feet away, separated by glass, and that nothing about this moment was simple or safe or part of any arrangement she had made with herself. "Say it," she said. He looked at her. In the intervals of city light his face was very still and very close, and the composure that was usually effortless seemed to cost him something right now, in this moment, in this car. "I notice everything about you," he said. It came out quiet, deliberate, like something he had been holding at a specific pressure for a long time and had finally decided to release. "The way you move through a room, the way you think 3 steps ahead of every situation, the way you look out the kitchen window at the lake in the mornings." A pause. "I have noticed all of it, from the beginning." The light changed. The car moved forward. Harper's chest was doing something she could not control and had stopped pretending she could. "Jamin, I'm not asking you for anything," he said. "I'm not making a proposition. I'm answering your question. You asked me why. That is why." She looked at him, at the careful, contained face of a man who had just handed her something real and was waiting, without pressure, without expectation, with the particular patience of someone who had learned to want things quietly, to see what she would do with it. She reached across the seat. Her hand found his in the dark. He turned his palm up and held hers. Neither of them spoke. The city moved past the windows. The river disappeared behind them. Chicago went on doing what cities did, enormous and indifferent and full of lives pressing against each other in the dark. Harper held his hand in the back of the car and felt the line between one version of her life and another pass beneath her like a seam in the road. She didn't pull back. She didn't pull back, and that was the thing she could not take back. The door she had stepped through, the point past which the careful architecture of 8 months of professional distance and deliberate walls and things she was not going to feel became something she could no longer maintain. His thumb moved once across the back of her hand. That was all. It was enough. The car dropped them at the estate at 11:47. Harper knew the time because she looked at her phone when the driver pulled through the gate. not because she needed to know the time, but because she needed something to do with her hands that was not holding his. She had held his hand for 22 minutes in the back of that car. She had not counted the minutes while it was happening. She counted them afterward, standing in the cold under the estate's front portico, while Jae-min spoke briefly to his driver, the way she counted things when she was trying to make something real by measuring it. 22 minutes. His palm had been warm and dry and completely still. He hadn't gripped, hadn't moved except for that single pass of his thumb across her knuckles, once, early, and then nothing. Just the steady fact of his hand holding hers in the dark, while Chicago slid past the windows. She hadn't pulled back. She still hadn't. The driver left. The gate closed. The estate settled around them in its November silence, the grounds dark beyond the reach of the portico lights. The lake invisible but present the way it always was, that cold weight of water at the edge of the property. Jaemin stood beside her. Not close. Not the way he'd been close in the car, that accidental proximity of a shared seat in a small space. He stood the way he stood in rooms, with intention, with the particular geometry of a man who placed himself deliberately. Come inside, he said, not a command, an offering. She went inside. But the kitchen again. It was always the kitchen. Harper thought distantly that she would spend the rest of her life associating that room with the precise moments when things changed. The morning she'd mentioned the date, the Sunday evening with the tea, and now this, the two of them in the kitchen at nearly midnight with the overhead light too bright and the cold coming off the windows, and the whole evening sitting between them like something that needed to be named before it could be moved. He poured water, set a glass in front of her, stood on the other side of the island. She looked at the glass, looked at him. I need to say something, she said. All right. I'm not... She stopped, tried again. What tonight was. I don't know what the car was. I don't know what any of the last 3 weeks have been. And I need you to understand that I am not a person who does well with not knowing. He held her gaze. Let her finish. I need it to be real, she said. Whatever this is. If it's something, it needs to be actual. Not... She pressed her hand flat on the island. Not whatever the space between employer and employee looks like when it gets complicated. Not something that exists in the margins of a professional arrangement. If it's real, it has to be real. Jaemin was quiet for a moment. The kitchen hummed around them. The refrigerator, the low breath of the heating system, the wind finding the north windows. I understand, he said. Do you? Yes. He moved around the island, not quickly. He stopped 2 feet from her, close enough that she had to adjust her awareness, that the air between them became a different kind of air. I am not a man who deals in margins, Harper. When I want something, I know it. I have known it for a long time. A pause. The question was never what I wanted. The question was what you were willing to step into. She looked up at him. And what am I stepping into? Something crossed his face. Something honest and unguarded in a way she had almost never seen from him. Something complicated, he said. Something that requires trust in both directions. Something I cannot make simple for you no matter how much... He stopped, edited. Something real. Harper held that. Let it settle. Okay, she said. Okay. I'm not moving out of my room, she said. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. Something adjacent to it. I wouldn't ask you to, he said. She picked up the water glass and drank. Set it down. The kitchen held its silence, and inside it something had been completed. Not resolved, not finished, but settled into its actual shape, the way a fracture settles after the bone accepts what happened to it. Get some sleep, she said. You look tired at dinner. I was tired at dinner. You hit it reasonably well. Only reasonably? I've been watching you for 8 months, she said. Reasonably is generous. He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he picked up his water glass and walked to the doorway. Harper, he said, not turning. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. For tonight. The event. A pause. All of it. He walked down the corridor. Harper stood in the kitchen with her water glass and the overhead light too bright, and the feeling of standing on ground that had shifted and not yet finished shifting, that was still finding its new level beneath her feet. She stood there for a while. Then she went to bed. 4 days passed. 4 days of the estate recalibrating around a new fact. The way a room recalibrated after furniture was moved. The same elements, the same dimensions, the changed geography of where things now stood in relation to each other. Harper moved through her work with the same efficiency she always moved through it. She managed the post-event administration for the Alderman dinner. She coordinated the winter maintenance schedule for the grounds. She handled 3 vendor contracts and a plumbing issue in the East Wing and a scheduling conflict for the cleaning team. She and Jamin occupied the same spaces with a new kind of consciousness. Not awkward. Awkward would have been manageable, familiar, something she had tools for. This was something else. An awareness. The specific charged quality of 2 people who have acknowledged something true and are now navigating what truth requires of them. He brought her coffee on Thursday morning. She was at the kitchen table with her laptop and her vendor files, and he came downstairs early. Earlier than usual, she noted, a detail she noted the way she noted all his details, and made 2 cups without being asked, and set one in front of her and sat across the table. She looked at the coffee, looked at him. "This isn't going to become a thing," she said. "It's coffee. It's a gesture. It's coffee, Harper." She pulled the mug toward her. "Fine." He opened his phone and read something, and she went back to her vendor files, and the kitchen held a silence that was entirely new. Not the occupied, weighted silence of before. Not the professional distance, but something that had warmth in it, something that breathed. She told Danny on Friday. Not everything. Enough. Danny was silent for 4 full seconds, which was extraordinary for Danny. "The Mafia boss," Danny said finally. "He runs legitimate businesses." Harper. "I know. The Mafia boss," Danny said again, slower. "I know what I'm doing." "Do you?" She had asked herself the same question. She didn't have a clean answer. She had something that felt true, something that felt chosen with eyes open, which was not the same as knowing and was also not the same as reckless. It was the specific territory of a decision made with full awareness of its complications. "I think so," she said. "I'll let you know." Danny made a sound that covered several things at once, fear and resignation, and the particular brand of love that looked like exasperation. "Call me," Danny said, "regularly, with confirmation of life." "I'll call you," Harper said. "What?" The call came on Sunday. Harper was in the study at 2 in the afternoon, working. Jamin was upstairs. She could hear him moving, the specific weight of his footfall, the quiet of a man who lived inside his own thoughts. The estate was its usual winter self, the grounds locked under gray sky, the lake flat and cold. Her phone rang. Unknown number, Chicago area code. She almost didn't answer. She answered. "Harper Williams." The voice was male, flat, not a question. She went still. "Who is this?" "My name isn't something you need." A pause that felt practiced. The pause of someone who used silence professionally. "I have information about your employer, about Jamin Seo. I think you'll want to hear it before you make any further decisions about your personal situation." The study felt very quiet. Harper looked at the window, at the gray sky above the lake. "I'm going to hang up," she said. "Vivian Seo," the voice said. Her hand stopped moving toward the end call button. "His wife," the voice said. "Though I imagine he hasn't mentioned her." The room did something. The walls didn't move, but they seemed to. The particular gravity of the space changed in a way that had nothing to do with physics and everything to do with the word that had just landed in her ear. "Wife." "You have 30 seconds, Harper said. Her voice was level. She was proud of it for being level. "Vivian Seo, née Vivian Kwan, married to Jamin in 2019, currently residing in Seoul. They've been separated for 2 years, but the divorce has never been finalized. Legally, Harper, he's still married." Her thumb pressed end call. She set the phone face down on the desk. The study was very quiet. She sat with the quiet for a moment. Then she picked up the phone and pulled up a browser and typed the name. Vivian Kwan Seo. She did it the way she did everything, methodically, without drama, looking for the shape of the information before she decided what it meant. It took 4 minutes to confirm that the information was real. Vivian Kwan, 34, Seoul-based. Her social media was sparse but traceable, a woman who existed publicly enough to be verified and privately enough to be protected. There were 3 photographs from 2019 that Harper found through a tagged reference on a lifestyle publication site. A function in Seoul. A woman in a dark dress, elegant and composed, standing beside Jamin, his hand at the small of her back. Harper set the phone down. She sat for a moment with her hands flat on the desk. Then she stood up and walked to the window and stood with her forehead nearly touching the cold glass and looked at the lake. She stood there for 7 minutes. Then she went to find him. So, I was in the upstairs sitting room, reading. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway and read her face in 1 second. She saw him do it, the instantaneous read of a man who had learned to assess situations rapidly, and put the book down. "What happened?" he said. She came into the room. She didn't sit. She stood in the center of the room with her arms at her sides and looked at him. "Vivian Seo," she said. His face did not collapse. It went still in a specific way that was different from his usual stillness, denser, more deliberate. The stillness of someone absorbing impact and deciding in real time how to carry it. "Who contacted you?" he said. "That's your first question." "Harper, that is your first question." The level in her voice was holding but barely. Not, "I can explain." Not, "It isn't what you think." "Who called you?" "Someone who knew to call," he said. "Someone who monitors someone connected to a competing interest." He stood. "Let me explain. You're married. We've been separated for you're legally married." She heard her voice do something she didn't want it to do and pulled it back. "For how long were you going to... What exactly was the plan, Jamin? We hold hands in the back of cars while your wife is in Seoul?" "The divorce has been in process for 14 months. There are legal complications that exist because of the nature of certain business arrangements and the cross-jurisdictional..." "Stop." She held up her hand. "Do not give me the legal architecture of your marriage right now. I am asking you something much simpler." She met his eyes. "Were you ever going to tell me?" The room held its silence. That was its own answer. Harper felt it land in her chest like something thrown from a height. "I was trying to resolve it first," he said. Before what? Before I..." She stopped, pressed her fingers against her mouth for a second, dropped her hand. "I told you I needed it to be real. 4 days ago. I stood in the kitchen and I told you that exactly. I said if it was something it had to be actual." Her voice was quiet now, quieter than before. Quiet the way things got when the temperature dropped past a certain point. "And you said you understood." "I do understand." "Then why didn't you tell me?" He looked at her. The composed face was still composed, but the cost of it was visible now. The specific cost of a man who was holding himself together while something real moved beneath it. "Because I was afraid," he said, "that it would end this before it began." Harper looked at him for a long moment. "I was telling the truth." She knew how to read him. 8 months had given her the specific literacy of his silences and his inflections, and the particular way his eyes held things he meant versus things he was managing. He was telling the truth. It didn't fix anything. "I need to think," she said. "Harper, I need you to give me tonight." She picked her phone up from where she'd set it on the chair arm. "I need you to not... I need the space." He closed his mouth, looked at her with something in his face she had no name for and did not have the capacity to examine right now. "All right," he said. She walked to the door. "The person who called you," he said behind her. "It wasn't a courtesy. They called because they want leverage over me, over this." A pause. "They called because they've been watching the estate." She stopped in the doorway. "Watching it how?" she said. "Long enough to know what's changed between us." His voice was careful, precise. "Which means they believe you matter enough to me to be used as a pressure point." She turned and looked at him. In the afternoon light of the upstairs sitting room, he looked like what he was. A man who lived in a world where the things he cared about became weapons in other people's hands, where the decision to feel something was a security risk, where love, if that was what this was, if she was allowed to use that word even internally, was a vulnerability that enemies cataloged. She had known this. She had known the shape of his world without being permitted to see it clearly. Now she was seeing it clearly. "Who are they?" she said. "A rival organization. They've been attempting to destabilize several of my business relationships for the past 8 months." He held her eyes. "The timing of their call is not coincidental. They waited until they had something that would hurt." Harper stood in the doorway with her phone in her hand and the cold coming off the corridor behind her and the full weight of what she had walked into settling around her shoulders. "You have to finalize the divorce," she said. "Whatever the complications are, whatever the timeline has been, that changes now." "Yes." "And whoever called me, they know where I live." "Yes." She absorbed that, the shape of it. The specific threat of being known, of existing on someone's map as a point of leverage for a man who had enemies who used people. "I need tonight," she said again. He nodded. She walked out. She went to her room and sat on the edge of her bed in her work clothes and looked at the floor and breathed, in, out, measured, deliberate, and felt the ground continuing to shift beneath her in its slow, unfinished way, and understood, with a clarity that was neither comfortable nor deniable, that the version of herself that had walked into this estate 8 months ago as a live-in housekeeper with professional boundaries and careful rules and a precise internal geography of someone else's world was not the version of herself sitting on this bed right now. That version was gone. Whatever came next would require a different person. She wasn't sure yet whether she was that person. She had until morning to decide. She didn't sleep. She tried. She lay on top of the covers in her work clothes with the lamp off and the darkness of her room pressing down and her mind running the same circuit it had been running since she walked out of that sitting room. The phone call. Vivian. The photograph. His face when she said the name. The way he'd said "I was afraid." The way that had been true and insufficient at the same time. At 2 in the morning, she got up. She didn't go to him. She went to the kitchen, her default, the room she trusted, and stood at the sink with the cold tap running over her wrist the way she'd done since she was a teenager when her thoughts ran too hot and she needed something physical to slow them. The water was very cold. The lake outside the window was invisible, just black beyond the glass, but she could feel it out there, that enormous indifferent weight of cold water. She stood there for a while. Then she dried her hands and sat at the kitchen table and opened her laptop and started pulling everything she could find on Vivian Seo's divorce proceedings. Not because she had access to sealed legal documents, she didn't, but because she had learned over 8 months that the shape of a legal situation left traces in public records if you knew how to look. Property filings, business registration changes, jurisdictional transfers. She found enough. The divorce was real. 14 months of documentation, cross-referenced between Illinois and Korean civil records. It was complicated in the specific way that Jamin had said it was complicated. Business asset entanglement, international jurisdiction, the particular legal architecture of a marriage that had been built partly around corporate structure. It was not a fiction. It was not a man stringing 2 women along in different time zones. It was a man who had made a decision to resolve something before he declared it resolved, and had misjudged how long resolution would take, and had let something real develop in the space between. She sat with that for a long time. It didn't make her less angry, but it made the anger a different shape, less like betrayal, and more like the specific frustration of someone who had been protected from information in a way that was meant as care and had landed as control. She was still sitting there at 4:15 when she heard him on the stairs. He appeared in the kitchen doorway. He'd changed out of his clothes from the evening. Dark sweater, trousers, bare feet on the cold floor. He looked at her at the kitchen table with her laptop and her cold coffee, and he didn't say anything for a moment. "You didn't sleep," he said. "No." He came in. Didn't turn on the overhead light. The under-cabinet lights were enough. A low ambient glow that kept the kitchen dim and somehow easier. He filled the kettle, set it on the burner, stood with his back to her for a moment. "The divorce will be finalized," he said. "I made 3 calls last night. The legal team is moving on the remaining asset separation this week. 6 weeks, maybe 8. "That's not why I'm up," she said. He turned. "I know you're not lying to me," she said. "I've spent 4 hours confirming that, and I already knew it before I started." She closed the laptop. "What I'm trying to understand is whether I can be in this. Not whether you're honest. Whether I can stand inside your world and not disappear." He was quiet. "Because what happened yesterday, the phone call, the person watching the estate, being used as a leverage point against you, that's not a one-time event. That's the condition." She met his eyes across the kitchen. "Isn't it?" He didn't look away. "Yes." "So I need to know what that actually means. Not the version you think I can handle. The real version." The kettle began to build. He turned back to it, made the tea, brought both mugs to the table, sat across from her the way he'd sat on Thursday morning, 4 days ago, in what felt now like a different chapter. He set his hands around his mug. "There are people," he said slowly, "who would use you, who already know your name, where you sleep, what you mean to me." He said it plainly. No softening. "That is real, and it does not go away. It can be managed. It has been managed for a long time for the people adjacent to my life, but it cannot be made not true. Harper held her mug. And the people who called me. Rhea's organization. They've been attempting to move into supply routes that I control on the north side. They've been escalating pressure for 4 months. His voice was even, factual, the voice he used when he was reporting rather than explaining. The call to you was a message. They wanted me to know they'd identified a vulnerability. Me. Yes, she absorbed that. The specific weight of being someone's vulnerability, of existing on a threat map with her name and her address and her relationship to a man who ran things that other men wanted. What happens to them? She said. He looked at her. The Reyes organization, she said. What happens to them for making that call? Something moved behind his eyes. The recognition of a question he had not expected from her, in that form, with that steadiness. That's being handled, he said. I'm not asking for details, she said. I'm asking whether it's handled, whether I need to be afraid inside this house. You do not need to be afraid inside this house, he said. You have never needed to be afraid inside this house. That will not change. She looked at him for a long moment, at the steady, dark eyes of a man who controlled an empire and was sitting in his kitchen at 4 a.m. drinking tea across from his housekeeper who was not his housekeeper anymore and hadn't been for some time. I have conditions, she said. He waited. The divorce. 6 to 8 weeks, you said. That's the deadline, not the estimate. I need it done. Done, he said. I don't stay as an employee. Whatever this is, whatever we are, I can't be on your payroll. I need my own income, my own position, something that exists independently of this house and your name. He was already nodding. I have a property management division within CO Holdings. Legitimate, entirely above board. There is a senior coordinator position that has been open for 3 months. It requires exactly the qualifications you have. A pause. I identified it 6 weeks ago. Harper stared at him. 6 weeks ago, she said. I didn't assume. He held her eyes. I wanted you to have the option, whether you chose this or not, whether you chose me or not. I wanted you to be able to leave this house on your own terms if that was what you wanted. She stared at him for another moment. That's, she started, stopped. Presumptuous, he said. I know. I was going to say that's the most... She stopped again, pressed her hand flat on the table. You planned an exit for me. I planned a choice for you, he said. There's a difference. The kitchen held its quiet. The lake outside existed in its cold, invisible way. The house breathed around them, old walls, old silence, the particular weight of a space that had held a great deal of living. Okay, Harper said. Okay, he said. She picked up her tea. It was the right temperature now, the kind of warmth you could hold without burning. She drank. He drank. The kitchen held them both. Get a few hours, she said finally. You have the Nakamura call at 9. You remember my schedule. Someone has to. He looked at her with something in his face that she was learning to read. That particular combination of things that was not quite a smile and not quite something else, but lived in the territory between. The expression of a man who had spent a long time not allowing himself to feel things freely and was, slowly, in increments, allowing something through. He stood, took his mug to the sink. Harper, he said. Yeah. Thank you for staying up. I wasn't doing it for you, she said. I was doing it for me. I know, he said. That's why I'm thanking you. He walked out of the kitchen. His footsteps went up the stairs. The house settled back into its breathing. Harper sat with her tea until the first gray light began at the edge of the lake. Then she went to her room and slept for 3 hours and woke up ready. The next 72 hours moved fast. Jamin's legal team filed the accelerated separation documents on Monday morning. He told her over breakfast, brief, factual, a man reporting on a task completed. She nodded and refilled her coffee and asked about the Nakamura call, and they moved forward the way they had learned to move, parallel, functional, the professional structure still intact because they both understood it served a purpose and would continue to serve a purpose until they were standing on different ground. She drafted her resignation letter on Monday afternoon, kept it short, professional, effective in 30 days. Slid it under his study door at 5 o'clock. He found it and came to her room and knocked. 30 days, he said when she opened the door. Standard notice period. You could make it 2 weeks. I could, she said. I'm giving you 30 days because the estate needs proper transition management, and I'm not going to leave it half done. That's not about you. He looked at her for a moment. No, he said. It isn't. The CO Holdings position, she said. I'll need the official job description. I'll apply through the proper process. I'm not taking a position because you created it for me. I'm taking it if I'm qualified and if I want it. You are qualified. Send me the description. He sent it that evening. She read it twice. She was qualified. She applied the following morning through the company's HR portal like anyone else would. Resume, cover letter, references. She listed her 8 months at the estate under property management experience, and she did not list Jae-min Seo as a reference. She listed his property operations director, a woman named Clara Shin, who had spoken to Harper exactly twice in 8 months, and both times with the specific evaluative attention of someone who was deciding what she thought. Clara Shin called her on Wednesday. The interview was 40 minutes. It was professional and rigorous, and Clara Shin asked questions that required real answers, not the softened performance answers that jobs given as favors required. Harper gave her real answers. At the end, Clara said she'd be in touch within the week. She was in touch within 2 days. Harper had the position. She sat in her room with the offer letter on her screen and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Something clean, something that belonged entirely to her, that no one had handed her and no one could take back. She called Danny. I got a job, she said. Danny was silent for 3 seconds. At the new job, different company. I applied and interviewed and I got it. A pause. Then, Harper Williams. Yeah, you applied for a job while living in a Mafia boss's house while also possibly falling in love with him. The company is legitimate. That's not the part I was commenting on. Harper looked out her window. The lake in late November, the first ice beginning at the edges, the cold settling in for the long stay. I know, she said. She told Jae-min on Thursday evening. He was in the study. She knocked, came in, stood in front of his desk the way she'd stood in this room 100 times in 8 months, upright, direct, the housekeeper's posture she'd been hired with. I accepted the CO Holdings position, she said. He set his pen down. I start the second week of January, she said, which gives me 2 weeks overlap after my notice period ends to ensure the estate transition is complete. I've already begun the handover documentation. He looked at her. Something in his face was very still and very full at the same time. Congratulations, he said. It came out quiet. Real. Clara Shin runs a tight process, Harper said. You should know your HR team is genuinely good. I'll tell her you said so. Don't. I'll tell her myself. His mouth did the thing that wasn't quite a smile. She turned to go. Harper. She stopped. I've been looking at apartments, he said. For you. I'm not selecting one. I've been looking at the kind of thing you'd want. Buildings with good light. South-facing units. She turned back, looked at him. You've been apartment hunting for me. Compiling options, he said carefully. For you to review, if you want them. She looked at him for a long moment. At the desk, and the lamp, and the careful, composed face of a man who planned exits and compiled apartment listings, and made calls at midnight, and sat across kitchen tables at 4 a.m. and had, over 8 months, learned the exact quality of her silences the way she had learned his. Send me the list, she said. I'll send it tonight. She nodded, walked to the door. Jae-min. Yes. She looked back at him over her shoulder. The south-facing ones. Make sure they have good kitchen windows. She walked out before she could see his expression fully, but she heard him, just barely, just at the edge of audible, exhale. Like something released, like pressure held for a very long time, finally finding its way out. The RIA's situation broke on a Friday. Harper was in the middle of the handover documentation, building a manual for whoever came after her, a comprehensive operational guide for the estate that she was making exhaustively detailed because that was who she was, when she heard the vehicles, 2 of them, coming through the gate at 11 a.m. without announcement. She was at the window fast. Not panicked. She had learned in the last 2 weeks to move toward information rather than away from it. 2 black SUVs, the gate code used correctly, which meant either Jae-min had authorized the entry or someone had obtained the code, which were 2 very different situations. She pulled out her phone and called him before she'd consciously decided to. He picked up on the first ring. I know, he said. Stay inside, don't open any doors. Who are they? Mine, he said. They're mine. Stay inside. She stayed inside. She watched from the upstairs corridor window as Jae-min came out of the main entrance. Calm, unhurried, the particular controlled ease of a man who had been expecting this. 3 men got out of the first vehicle. She didn't recognize them. They spoke to Jae-min for 4 minutes by her count, standing in the cold of the estate driveway with their breath visible in the air between them. She couldn't hear the conversation. She read the body language, the men's posture, deferential but with the specific tension of people delivering information that was neither good nor bad, but consequential. Jae-min's posture, taking it in, processing it with the still face and the steady hands. Then he nodded once. The men got back in their vehicles. The vehicles left. Jae-min stood in the driveway for a moment. Then he looked up. He found her window immediately. Didn't scan the facade, didn't search. He knew exactly where she'd be. He held her eyes from the driveway for a moment. Then he came back inside. She met him at the base of the stairs. He was cold from the outside. She could feel it coming off him when he stopped 2 feet from her. It's handled, he said. The Reyes situation. It's been resolved. She looked at him. Resolved how? The way things in my world get resolved, he said. No one was hurt. The pressure stops. She held his eyes. You're sure? Yes, she breathed out. Okay. Okay, he said. They stood at the base of the stairs in the cold he'd brought in with him from outside. The house was very quiet. The estate had returned to its particular silence, occupied, waited, the silence of a space that held more than it showed. I found an apartment, she said. He went still. South-facing, 8th floor, good kitchen window. I checked the listing photos 3 times. She looked at him steadily. It overlooks the river. When did you find it? This morning, before all this. She held his eyes. I want to take it. Something moved through his face. A wave of something that he didn't fully contain and didn't, she realized, fully try to. Then take it, he said. I want you to see it first, she said. Not to approve it. I don't need your approval. I want you to see it because... She stopped, found the honest words. Because it's mine and you're part of what comes next. I want the 2 things to know about each other. Jae-min looked at her. In the cold air at the base of the stairs, with the winter estate quiet around them, and the lake somewhere outside doing its flat, cold, indifferent work. He looked at her the way she had felt him looking at her for months without allowing herself to fully receive it. Friday, he said. Friday, she said. She went back upstairs. Her hands were not entirely steady as she sat back down at her desk and opened the handover documentation and found her place again. But they steadied. They always steadied. That was the thing about Harper Williams. She shook, and then she steadied. And then she kept going, and she had been doing it her whole life, and she was still here, still upright, still choosing, still choosing. Her phone buzzed. A message from Jae-min. The apartment on the river. What's the address? She smiled before she could stop it. She sent him the address. His reply came back in 40 seconds. Friday at noon. I'll drive. Harper set her phone down and looked at the handover documentation on her screen. The meticulous, comprehensive record of everything she had built and managed and understood about this estate. Everything she was preparing to hand to someone else. Everything that had been the shape of her life for 8 months and was now becoming the past tense of her life. The foundation of something she was building forward from rather than standing still inside. She put her hands on the keyboard. She kept going. Outside, the November lake pressed against the edges of the property, cold and enormous and entirely unmoved by the lives being lived at its edge. The sky was the low gray of coming winter, the kind that settled in and stayed for months, the kind that Chicago wore like a second skin. Inside, in the particular silence of the Seo estate on a Friday morning in late November, a woman sat at a desk and built the bridge between one version of herself and the next. And in the study below her, a man who had spent his whole life controlling everything within his reach, sat with an address on his phone screen and felt, for the first time in longer than he could clearly remember, the specific terrifying lightness of something he could not control and did not want to. Friday came in cold and clear. The kind of Chicago morning that arrived in late November like a declaration. Sky hard and blue above the lake. Air sharp enough to feel against the inside of your lungs. The city stripped of its softness and showing its actual structure beneath. Harper stood at her bedroom window at 7 in the morning and watched the frost on the estate grounds catch the early light, and thought about the first morning she had stood at this same window, 8 months ago, learning the geography of someone else's world. She had learned it thoroughly. Now she was building her own. She finished packing the box she'd been working on since Wednesday. Not everything, not yet. 30 days was 30 days, and she intended to use them properly. But the personal things, the small accumulated evidence of a self that had existed before this house and would exist after it. A photograph of her and Danny from 3 years ago, taken at a rooftop bar in Logan Square on a warm night when everything had seemed possible in the uncomplicated way things seemed possible before life got specific. A coffee mug she'd brought from her last apartment, slightly chipped at the rim. 3 books she'd read in the East Wing library on afternoons when the house was quiet and the work was done. She taped the box and wrote her name on the top in marker and set it by the door. Then she went downstairs to make coffee, because it was 7 in the morning, and that was what you did. But I was already in this kitchen. This had been true for the last 2 weeks. He came downstairs earlier than he used to, or she had simply started noticing it, which amounted to the same functional change in the texture of their mornings. He was at the counter with his back to her when she came in, the coffee already made, 2 mugs already out. She sat down at the table. He brought both mugs over without comment and sat across from her. This was new too, not the sitting. He'd sat across from her in this kitchen many times now, the ease of it, the absence of the careful calculation that had governed every proximity for 8 months, the unconscious assessment of distance and meaning that they had both performed and both denied performing. It was gone now. What was left was just 2 people in a kitchen in the early morning, drinking coffee, the lake gray blue and glittering out the window above the sink. The appointment's at noon, she said. I know. There's parking in the building garage. I'll send you the code. Harper. She looked at him. I know how to park a car, he said. She looked back at her coffee. Fine. He drank. She drank. A bird crossed the window. One of the last holdouts before the deep winter, something small and fast-moving low over the frost-covered lawn. I spoke to the attorney this morning, he said, about the divorce. The asset separation document was executed yesterday. We're in the final review period. He set his mug down. 4 weeks, possibly 3. She absorbed that. 3 to 4 weeks. Yes. She nodded, looked at her coffee. Okay. I wanted you to know the timeline was real, he said, not a number I was offering to make you feel better. I know it's real, she said. I've been tracking the filings. I was quiet for a moment. Of course you have. I told you. 8 months of learning how you operate. She met his eyes. I trust what I can verify. That's not a character flaw. No, he said. It isn't. Something in his expression, measured, careful, and beneath it something much less guarded. It's one of the things about you that I have found it very difficult to look away from. The kitchen held its quiet. The lake sparkled in the morning sun. Harper let the words land and settle and didn't deflect them, didn't manage them into something smaller and safer. She let them be what they were. Don't make me spill my coffee, she said. His mouth did the thing. She was keeping a private catalog of the variations of that almost smile, and this one, the one that reached the corners of his eyes, she had only seen 4 times. I'll try, he said. She spent the morning on handover documentation, the way she'd spent most mornings for the past 2 weeks. The manual was nearly complete, 47 pages covering every operational system of the estate, every vendor relationship, every maintenance schedule, every particular preference and particular requirement that kept the property functioning at the standard it had been built to function at. It was the most thorough professional document she had ever produced. She was not entirely sure who would receive it. Jamin had said he was considering shifting to a property management service rather than replacing the live-in position, but she had written it as though the person who read it would need everything, and she intended to give them everything. At 10:30, she changed into the clothes she'd laid out the night before. Dark jeans, a clean sweater, boots with enough sole for the cold, and stood in front of her small mirror and looked at herself. 29 years old. Hands that had stopped being soft 7 years ago. A face that had learned, over the course of a specific 8 months, to stop performing arrangements it didn't feel. She looked like herself. That seemed right. Well, he drove a charcoal gray car that suited him, understated, expensive, no performance detail that needed to announce itself. Harper got in and buckled her seatbelt, and he pulled through the gate, and they joined the North Shore traffic heading south toward the city, and neither of them felt the need to fill the drive with noise. She watched Chicago assemble itself as they moved toward the center, the neighborhood shifting, the architecture changing registers, the city producing itself in layers the way it always did, the particular texture of a place that had been built by people who expected to stay. Clara Shin called me, Jamin said. Harper turned from the window. When? Yesterday. He kept his eyes on the road. She told me she'd hired you. She did not ask my opinion. She informed me as a courtesy because you'll be in the division I oversee. A pause. She also told me that if I made your professional situation in any way uncomfortable, she would have a conversation with me that I would not enjoy. Harper looked at him. Clara said that. In more formal language, the meaning was identical. I like Clara Shin, Harper said. So do I, he said. She's been with the company for 11 years. She's run that division without interference because she doesn't require any. He glanced at her briefly. You'll do well with her. I know, Harper said. I already know. He looked back at the road. The city moved around them, enormous and specific, going about its Friday. I want to say something, he said. Okay. A pause. I was building it carefully. She could feel him choosing the words the way he chose everything, with precision and intention. When you came to this estate, he said, I was managing. That is the most accurate word. I was managing the daily operational requirements of a life that had become entirely functional and not much else. He kept his eyes forward. I was not looking for anything to change. I had made a particular kind of peace with the way things were, and I had decided that peace was sufficient. A beat. You were supposed to be a professional arrangement. I was a professional arrangement, she said. You were never just that, he said. Not from the first week. I knew it from the first week, and I spent a considerable amount of energy pretending otherwise. He shifted lanes with the practiced ease of someone who'd driven this city for decades. I sent you those messages during your date because I could not sit in my study and read and not know whether you were all right, whether the person across the table from you was someone who understood what they were sitting across from. A pause. That was not professional jealousy. I want to be clear about that. What was it? She said. It was the specific terror, he said, of watching someone you have no right to want move further into a life that doesn't include you. Harper looked at him. At his profile against the city light, the particular stillness of his face when he was saying something entirely true. Jamin, she said. I'm not asking you for a response, he said. I'm completing a sentence I should have finished weeks ago, before the Vivian call, before any of it. He exhaled. I handled it badly. The omission. I know that. You did, she said. I was protecting something that wasn't mine to protect unilaterally. He glanced at her. Your ability to make an informed decision, that was yours. I withheld information that belonged in your hands, and I told myself it was consideration and it was fear. She held that, the precision of it. The specific self-accounting of a man who had examined his own behavior with the same exacting clarity he applied to everything else, and had found it wanting, and was saying so directly. Thank you, she said. He looked at her briefly, a question in it. For not dressing it up, she said, for just saying what it was. He returned his eyes to the road. Something in the set of his shoulders changed, barely, just a degree, the specific release of tension held against an outcome that had not yet been certain. They crossed the river bridge and the apartment building came into view. A converted industrial building, 8 stories, large windows running the south face. There, she said. He pulled into the garage. The apartment was on the 8th floor, southwest corner. The building manager let them in and gave Harper the keys and stepped out to give them space, which Harper noted was the kind of professional discretion that cost nothing and meant everything. She walked in first. The space was empty and clean and full of November light. The south-facing windows ran nearly floor to ceiling along one wall, and the city pressed against the glass, all steel in motion and the particular silver of a clear, cold day. The river was visible from the far corner of the main room, bending away toward the lake, moving with its own deliberate purpose. The kitchen was off the main room, large window above the sink, east-facing, which meant morning light. Harper stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the window. She heard Jamin come in behind her. She heard him move through the main room, unhurried, taking in the space with the specific attention of someone who understood buildings, who had spent years inside the geometry of spaces and knew how to read them. He stopped beside her in the kitchen doorway. They both looked at the window. Good light, she said. Yes, he said. It is. She walked into the kitchen, stood at the sink, and looked out the window at the morning. The roof lines of River North, the sky hard and blue, a flag on a building 2 blocks east moving in the cold wind coming off the lake. She put her hands on the edge of the sink. I want to take it, she said. Then take it, he said behind her. Not close, giving her the room to stand inside this decision the way she needed to stand inside it. She turned around. He was in the kitchen doorway, his hands in the pockets of his coat, looking at her with the specific open quality she had watched develop across the last 3 weeks. The composure still present, always present, but no longer entirely in front of him. Something behind it, visible now. Something that had been there for a long time and was no longer hidden. I need you to understand something, she said. He waited. I am not a person who does well being managed, she said. I know that about myself. I have left situations, jobs, relationships, arrangements, because the people in them confused care with control. I don't carry that well. I never have. She held his eyes. If this is going to be real, I need you to understand that whatever protective instinct you have, and I know it runs deep, it has to have a limit. I am not someone who needs to be stood between in the world. I need to be stood beside. He looked at her for a moment. I know, he said. I have been learning that. A pause. I will continue learning it. There will be moments when the instinct moves faster than the intention. I can only tell you that I am aware of the difference. That's all I'm asking, she said. Awareness. Then you have it, he said. She held his gaze, looking for the performance in it, the managed response, the strategic accommodation. She didn't find it. She found a man being honest at the limit of his vocabulary for honesty, which was different from dishonesty, and she knew the difference. Okay, she said. She walked to the large south window in the main room and stood with the city pressing against the glass and the river visible in the near distance and the whole cold, clear November day spread out below her like something she was about to step into. She heard him cross the room. He stopped beside her, closer than he'd stood before. The particular proximity that was no longer professional distance or managed space, but simply the natural distance between two people who had decided they were in the same place. They stood at the window and looked at the city. I've been thinking about what you said, she said, about the world you live in, the conditions, the people who would use the things that matter to you. Yes, I'm not going to pretend it doesn't exist, she said. I tried that for 8 months. The careful boundaries, the professional arrangement, the rules I built so I wouldn't have to look at what was actually happening. She watched a boat move on the river below. I can't do that anymore. I don't want to. But I'm also not going to pretend I'm not afraid of it sometimes. You should be afraid of it sometimes, he said. Anyone who isn't is not paying attention. She looked at him. Are you afraid of it? A pause. Long enough to be real. Yes, he said. Of specific things, specific outcomes. His eyes were on the city, the river, the particular geometry of the life he'd built. I'm afraid of the specific outcome in which the people who want leverage over me find it by going through you. You said it was handled, she said. The Reyes situation is handled, he said. My world does not run out of Reyes situations. He turned and looked at her directly. I will not lie to you about that. There will always be someone somewhere who understands that the way to reach me is to reach the people who matter to me. He corrected mid-sentence, not hiding the correction. I heard that, she said. I know, he said. She looked at him. At the particular careful face of a man who had organized an empire around control and was standing at a window with a woman he could not control and was choosing that, was actively choosing the loss of certainty because what replaced it was worth the exposure. I'm going to need to be able to call you, she said, not through channels, not through your assistant, you, directly. If something happens, if something feels wrong, I need to know that the line is open and you're on the other end of it. You have always had my direct number, he said. I know. I need to know using it doesn't cross a line. Harper. His voice was quiet and very certain. There is no line left to cross. She breathed out. The city sat below them, indifferent and enormous and continuing. The river moved in its deliberate way. The cold pressed against the glass, and the light poured through it, and the apartment held them both in its clean, empty, full of possibility way. She reached over and took his hand. not the way she'd reached for it in the car. Tentative, a question. This was different, her hand finding his with the specific sureness of someone who has decided. His fingers closed around hers the same way. Not a response, a choice. They stood at the window. Friday, she said. You said that already? I'm saying it again. Come Friday. When I move in. Come help me carry the boxes. He looked at her. You have 3 boxes. You don't know how many boxes I have. I know exactly how many boxes you have, he said. I watched you pack. She turned and looked at him fully. You watched me pack. Your door was open. My door was open for 30 seconds while I was taping a box. I was in the corridor. Jamin Seo. Yes. You stood in my corridor and watched me pack a box. I was passing through. There is nothing in that corridor except my room and the linen closet. The corner of his mouth, the version she had catalogued as number 4. Friday, he said. I'll carry the boxes. She shook her head. She was smiling. She felt it happen before she decided to allow it and let it happen anyway, because there was no margin left for managing the things she actually felt, and she had no interest in maintaining one. I'll call you with the time, she said. I'll answer, he said. She signed the lease at 2 o'clock. The building manager was efficient and professional, and the paperwork took 20 minutes. And when it was done, Harper held the keys in her hand, 2 of them, on a plain ring, cold from the manager's desk drawer, and felt the specific clean weight of something that was hers. Not given, not arranged, earned, applied for, signed for, hers. Jamin stood near the window while she signed, not hovering, not managing, present. When it was done, he walked to the door and held it open. She passed through first. That was new too. They drove back to the estate in the late afternoon light. The city shifted around them as they moved north. The same neighborhoods in reverse, the same layered architecture, but the light had changed, gone amber and low with the early winter sunset, the city turning gold before dark. Harper watched it. She thought about what she was taking with her when she left. The position at CO Holdings, hers, earned, independent. The apartment with the south-facing windows, and the kitchen window, and the river bending away toward the lake. The person she had become inside 8 months of a life she hadn't chosen and had made entirely her own despite that. The specific education of having learned someone, truly learned them, past the surface and the performance, and the careful managed presentation, and having decided that what she found beneath all of it was worth the complexity of reaching it. She thought about what she was leaving. The estate, which she had run with a precision she was genuinely proud of. The particular silence of those rooms, which she had learned to inhabit rather than fear. The version of herself who had arrived at those iron gates with rules and careful margins and a professional arrangement, and had discovered, over 8 months, that rules built from fear were a different thing than rules built from knowledge, and that the difference mattered. She had arrived afraid of what she might want. She was leaving knowing what she wanted and having chosen it with eyes open. That was not a small thing. The estate came into view through the iron gates as the last light left the sky. The lake was dark behind the property, the outline of the grounds pressed against the early stars, the windows of the main residence lit from within in their amber way. Jamin pulled through the gate and into the drive and stopped the car. Neither of them moved immediately. Thank you, she said, for driving. Thank you for letting me see it, he said. She looked at him. At the amber light from the house windows falling across the side of his face, the particular profile of a man she had spent 8 months learning from a careful professional distance, and was now learning differently, up close, directly, without the protective architecture of role and arrangement between them. It's a good apartment, she said. It's a very good apartment, he said. The kitchen window is the best part. The kitchen window is excellent, he agreed. She picked up her bag from the floor of the car, put her hand on the door handle. Jamin. Yes. She looked at him one more time, at the composed, careful, deeply specific face of a man who had spent his whole adult life controlling the things within his reach, and had learned, over the course of one particular 8 months, that the most important things were not things he could control, and had chosen them anyway, and was sitting in his driveway in the early dark with the evidence of that choice visible on his face for anyone with the specific literacy to read it. She had that literacy. The Harrington file, she said. He blinked. What? The first night, when I came home from the date. You said the Harrington file was exactly where you said it was. Thank you. She held his eyes. That was the tell, wasn't it? You'd known where it was all along. That was the first moment you actually showed me something. He looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said. I thought so, she said. She got out of the car. She walked to the side entrance of the estate. Her entrance, the one she'd used every day for 8 months. The door she knew by its particular resistance in cold weather, the way the handle required a slight upward pressure before it turned. She used it now without thinking. Her body knew this house, had learned it bone deep. She would leave it in 30 days. She would leave it with everything she'd come with and everything she'd built while she was here, and the specific, unlosable knowledge of what she was worth and what she was choosing and why. She put on the kettle. She heard the car door close outside, heard his footsteps on the front steps, his key in the front lock. The sound of the door opening and closing and the estate receiving him back the way it always did, completely, without remainder. His footsteps came down the corridor. He appeared in the kitchen doorway. She had 2 mugs out. He sat down at the table. She brought the tea when it was ready and set his in front of him and sat across from him, and the kitchen held them in its particular way. The overhead light, the lake invisible outside the window, the old estate breathing around them in its occupied silence. They drank their tea. Outside, Chicago moved under the winter stars, enormous and continuing and entirely indifferent to the specific lives being lived at its edges. The lake pressed cold against the shoreline. The city went on doing what cities did, building and breaking and building again, holding millions of lives inside its grid, each one pressing against the others in the dark. Inside, in a kitchen that had witnessed 8 months of 2 people learning each other through the careful architecture of professional distance and dissolving margins and honest conversations in early morning hours. 2 people sat with their tea and the particular silence that had stopped being silence long ago and was now something else entirely. Something chosen. Something built from the slow, difficult, necessary work of telling the truth. Harper looked at the kitchen window, at the dark glass and the suggestion of the lake behind it, and the faint reflection of the room, the table, the mugs, the 2 of them sitting across from each other in the amber kitchen light. She looked like herself in the reflection. She looked like someone who had decided. Her phone vibrated on the table. She looked at the screen. A listing notification from the building management app. Her new apartment. A confirmation of her lease start date, 1st of December, 3 weeks away. She turned the phone toward him. He looked at the screen, looked at her. 3 weeks, he said. 3 weeks, she said. I'll help you move, he said. I know, she said. She picked up her tea. He picked up his. The kitchen held its silence, warm now, full of what had been said and what no longer needed to be said, full of the specific gravity of 2 lives that had orbited each other for 8 months through careful distance and professional arrangement and the slow, unglamorous, essential work of becoming honest, and had finally, without fanfare, without the dramatic gesture, found the same ground. Not because it was easy, because they had chosen it, because she had chosen it, with her eyes open and her hands steady and the full knowledge of its complications. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, small and quiet, without announcement, the way the most significant things often came. The lake disappeared behind it. The city softened. Inside, 2 people drank their tea and watched the snow begin through the kitchen window, and the Mafia boss who had spent his life commanding silence found himself sitting in it differently, in the particular warm silence of someone whose world had been rearranged by a single sentence, spoken casually in a marble kitchen 8 months ago by a woman who had only meant to mention a date. He had never recovered from it. He did not intend to.